Good evening, and thank you for joining us for a panel discussion entitled Alabama, Our History is in the Census, Our Future is in Our Hands. The presentation is a part of the Census in the South Road to Recovery virtual bus tour here in Alabama. My name is Ann Clemens, and I'm a tour specialist, and I have the privilege of presenting Alabama's rich civil rights history to groups near and far about the significance of the sacrifices and strides that heroines like Mrs. Parks, Amelia Boynton, John Lewis, and of course Dr. Martin Luther King made to achieve the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. On December 1, 1955, when Rosa Parks took a stand for equality by sitting and refusing to move from her seat so a white passenger could sit, it began a year-long peaceful protest for equality, or in today's language, social justice for African Americans. On this past March 1st, 2020, Stacey Abrams was a special guest speaker for the 55th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, where chaos erupted on Selma's Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965, just because African Americans wanted their right to vote. It was an honor for me to escort Stacey Abrams and her family at Brown Chapel AME Church as she prepared to bring a message which included an astounding report on how important the census is to our communities. In Alabama, 49,500 people are at risk of being undercounted. That's 95% of those people are Black. Black people are the highest risk of not being counted for the census. Across our nation, the Black community has suffered from health disparities brought on by a lack of funding and racial injustices that has left us the most vulnerable community to viruses and diseases like COVID-19. As COVID-19 rates continue to rise across the nation, the South is particularly vulnerable. As of last Friday, we were 5th in the nation for the highest new daily cases of the illness. We know that the road to recovery is going to be long, but we will get there together. The census and COVID-19 are both in need of everyone's attention. And that's why Mitch Landrieu's E Pluribus Unum and Stacey Abrams' Fair Count have come together for Census in the South, Road to Recovery, a virtual bus tour emphasizing that a full recovery from this pandemic requires a fair and accurate census, and we are running out of time. Now, on this road to recovery, data from the census, which will be used to allocate funding and resources to communities to rebuild. As Stacey Abrams says, if you don't get counted, you simply won't count. Alabama is at a risk of losing $222 million a year in federal funding. That's $222 million in federal funding for the next decade. That is $4,491 per person, and we cannot afford that cost. Now, if you have not completed your census, you can do so online by going to www.my2020census.gov, or you may call at 1-844-330-2020. When you're done, encourage others to complete the census and visit censusinthesouth.org to see which state this bus tour will be in next. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Ara Jordan Davis, our moderator, for tonight's dynamic panel discussion. Thank you.
Good evening. I am R. Jordan Davis, host of Poppin' Policies podcast and a native of Birmingham, Alabama. Welcome to Alabama's Our History is in the Census, Our Future is in Our Hands panel discussion, a part of the Census in the South Road to Recovery virtual bus tour. E Pluribus Unum and Fair Count have come together for a series of events across the Southeast, emphasizing that a full recovery from this pandemic requires a fair and accurate census. In addition to this event, their teams and volunteers have been texting and calling Alabamians, encouraging them to participate in the 2020 census. As of today, Alabama has a total response rate, that's both self-response and the enumeration rate, of 76.6%, compared to the nation's total response rate of 85.7%. So you can see we have some work to do and why this conversation is so important tonight. We are certainly glad that you are able to join us to help us out tonight. But first, I would like to introduce our special guest. We have a distinguished group of community leaders from Alabama on the panel today. I will give each of them 60 seconds to introduce themselves. Judge Vanzetta McPherson, you're up first.
I'm Vanzetta McPherson. I am a retired United States Magistrate Judge for the Middle District of Alabama. I've been retired now for a little over 12 years. I practiced law for about 16 years before sitting on the bench for 15 years here in Montgomery. I'm a native Montgomeryan. I was educated elsewhere, but returned home in 1975, as a matter of fact. I'm also a mother and a grandmother. The reason why I mention that is because our subject matter tonight and the issues that we're going to be discussing have every implication for our future. So my concern is about the kind of world and nation that my children and grandchildren will live in, and the census has an enormous impact on them.
Thank you so much, Judge McPherson. Next up is Jay Williams.
Thank you, Jordan. And thank you for the opportunity to be here with my esteemed panelists. My name is Jay Williams, and by profession, I'm a social worker. But I have spent the last year of my life working with the Alabama Hard to Count Collaborative as their census state coordinator. And I mentioned that I'm a social worker because the census is tied to so many programs that are important for the people and the clients that we serve every single day. And I just want to say that if we don't get counted, those people will go without resources. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Next up is Pastor Valtoria Jackson. Good evening to you.
You might be on mute.
One more time.
There we go.
Good evening.
There you go. Good evening.
Again, I want to thank you for stopping the bus here in Alabama. And I'm coming to you from Montgomery, Alabama, a native and a grandchild and child of parents and grandparent that live next door to Rosa Parks. So the fire has been burning a mighty long time. And I'm excited to be a pastor at this time in this place to excite all faith-based organizations to be a part of the census, because faith is at the center. Churches, particularly in the South, the Bible Belt, is at the center of every community. And so today I represent 7 interfaith churches, from the Islam to the Baha'i faith, and definitely the Christian faith. And we've come together and we strongly support that you count, we all count in the state of Alabama.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up is Dr. Andre Mcshane. Good evening to you.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for this invitation. It's such a important topic, and I'm more than happy to spend some time discussing it with you guys today. My name is Dr. Andre Mcshane. I'm an assistant professor and physician with the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I am a Birmingham native, born and raised here. I left to attend Morehouse College for undergrad and then went up to Nashville to Meharry Medical College for medical school and residency. And like Judge McPherson, after leaving for several years, I found my way back to Alabama and back home to Birmingham. And I'm glad to be back here now with family. Happily married with 2 kids, 7 and 9. And the reason I mentioned that is because this conversation is really going to impact them even more than it impacts me. I mean, these are crucial issues that we're talking about for today in 2020, but the repercussions of our discussion today are going to be felt and will have impact in 2030, 40, 50, and beyond. So I'm happy to be here, and I just want to stress to the listeners that this is an extremely important topic, one that we should take very seriously, because we're going to feel the impacts of this for several years and decades to come. So thanks for the invitation, and I look forward to tonight's conversation.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Cedric Norman.
Good evening, everyone. And once again, thank you all for the opportunity to put some spotlight and focus on Alabama, and particularly Birmingham and the census. My name is Cedric Norman, and I'm with Think Rubik's. And our firm was contracted by the City of Birmingham's Planning and Engineering Department to amplify the efforts of all the partners in Birmingham that are doing the work of making sure everyone gets counted. In addition to being with Think Rubik's, I'm also a city council for a neighboring city, the city of Fairfield, Alabama. So this is doubly important for me, both in my work with the city of Birmingham and as a city councilor, knowing what budgets look like when that federal funding is not there, or that state funding or funding is needed. So, and furthermore, with my nephews, and one day hope to have children very soon of my own, I want to make sure opportunities are provided for them to be able to have better education, have access to resources. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and a lot of the resources that states are supplied are based on the numbers that are reported in the census. So without properly being counted, and particularly African Americans and underrepresented communities being counted, we are always seem to be at a disadvantage, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a racial disparity, whether it's always something that, doesn't bode in our favor. So it's equally important that we're all accounted, so that provides the needed resources for our communities, because the communities that are being counted in large amounts already have resources through various methods to be able to have nice neighborhoods, have nice school systems. But those that don't have those things, they're oftentimes are not thought about enough and need these resources that the census can provide. So I look forward to tonight's conversation to speak more about the importance of everyone being counted.
Thank you. We definitely appreciate all of you for being here tonight. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Mcshane. No one would have imagined that we would be navigating a global pandemic while also attempting to conduct the largest peacetime function of our democracy, being counted in the census. COVID-19 continues to tear apart our communities, specifically communities of color. There's a lot of focus on how the election will be impacted by the pandemic, but what are the consequences of not being counted in the 2020 census, specifically for healthcare services in our communities?
Yeah, that's the million dollar question there. This is what I can tell you. One common theme I'm sure we're going to hear a lot tonight is that the census is, really comes down to resource allocation. Where does the money get spent? We're talking about a federal budget of about $1.5 trillion, and the money's going to go somewhere. The question is, where does it go? And the way the government knows where to send the money, where to send the checks, where to write the checks is based on who's there. Right. I mean, the people, the population want to get the money back. We pay the taxes. We fund and invest in the government, and that money should come back to us to form and feed our communities. But if the count's off and the government doesn't know where we are and where the people are, then we'll have a misallocation of funds. So it really comes down to where the money gets spent, where the roads are built, where the schools are built, and speaking from a healthcare perspective, where the hospitals are built. What we've seen over the past decade or so is really a crisis when it comes to rural healthcare. As a country, we've lost about 120 rural hospitals that are vital for those communities. But when you have an inaccurate count and it's not clear how many lives are being saved and served by those facilities, it's very easy to shutter windows and lock doors. And that's what we've seen. Out of that 120 or so, 75 of them have been in the South. So we've really reached a crisis point, particularly with rural healthcare. And the census is one of the main ways that we can combat and reverse that trend and really get more healthcare where it's needed. The second thing is representation. We have to have representatives that represent the communities at appropriate levels so that they can send those messages to Washington to make sure that those community needs are addressed. Right. When we have inadequate representation, and Alabama is at risk of losing a congressional seat this year. When we have inadequate representation, then the story is not being told and the needs are not going to be adequately met.
That's right.
You know, one thing I want to throw out and one thing I want to leave in everybody's mind from a healthcare perspective, and this is kind of something that physicians are talking about more and more, 85% of our overall health, the health status of an individual is based on what we call social determinants of health. Those are things like economic stability in the family, quality of education, access to quality health care, availability of healthy and nutritious foods. Those are the social determinants that really play the largest and most significant role in the health of the individual. So with that being said, it's all a loop. That's where the rubber meets the road and everything is connected. If we're not having those social determinants accurately and effectively addressed with access to health care, access to quality education, access to nutritious foods, access to recreational activities, which are mainly funded by the government, if that's not being put in place, then the healthcare of the community is going to suffer. So that's what we've seen up until this point, and that's why getting an accurate census count is so important, so that we can start to reverse some of those things and improve the health of the community. So extremely important. I can go on and on talking about it. As you can tell, it's something I'm passionate about, but it's extremely important from a healthcare perspective that we get this right and we get it right now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And for those families who may be at a disadvantage when it comes to the best healthcare services and being provided the best healthcare, what is your advice to families who are trying to stay safe and healthy? What are some best practices for them?
Well, of course, right now, the main thing we want to focus on is the coronavirus. So in the age of COVID, you know, there are things that we need to be doing right this second to best protect ourselves. I know it's getting kind of cliche at this point, but we have to social distance and we have to wear the mask. I mean, there's really no other way around it. This is a virus. It's spread from one person to another. It's not a magical virus. You have to be in a certain proximity to somebody else for them to get it from you or for you to get it from them. So if you're appropriately staying away from other people as much as possible, especially people that are not in your what we call the bubble of trust, the few people that you've been around and you trust their practices and you feel like they're not making, you know, poor and unwise decisions. When you're moving outside of your bubble of trust to other people, you have to stay as distant as possible. You know, a couple of things we don't talk about quite as much are maintaining appropriate nutritional status and exercise. What we've seen with who really gets sick and dies from this, with certain exceptions, of course, but for the most part, there are people with pre-existing, often chronic medical conditions. With that being said, the more that we can do to eat healthy foods, exercise regularly, starting right now, try to improve our personal health, it will just increase our personal resistance and resilience, so that if we do come in contact with the coronavirus, we'll have a better chance of fighting it off and not falling ill to it. Flu shots are going to be here soon. I want to take a second to encourage everybody to get a flu shot. You know, once you bring in influenza on top of the coronavirus, you're really talking about a double crisis, and one that the healthcare system will struggle to deal with. So I encourage flu shots very strongly. And the last thing I want to encourage is that if you are sick, don't be afraid to go see your doctor. If you are sick and you're having a true medical emergency, do not be afraid to go to the emergency department. Appropriate infection control steps and measures are being taken in healthcare facilities. And one of the unfortunate things that we're seeing now is people avoiding to follow those needed healthcare pursuits because they're afraid of catching the coronavirus. So this is not the time to ignore what could be stroke symptoms, what could be heart attack symptoms, what could be other serious medical conditions out of fear of contracting the virus, because hospitals are there for a reason and we still need to use them if we need them. So those are my tips for folks. And again, something I'm passionate about is something I can probably run off more stuff about all night long, but I'll cut myself off there.
No, we appreciate your expertise. I want to swing it to Jay Williams. You've been leading efforts to ensure that hard-to-count communities are mobilized and counted this year. How are things looking right now in Alabama in terms of response rates, and how do they compare to previous census counts?
Thank you, Jordan. That's a wonderful question, and I'm very proud of Alabama. And I say that because when you look at Alabama compared to a lot of other states, there's a lot of improvement at the county level. As I've seen it, as of right now, Alabama has a self-response rate of 62.1%. In 2010, we had a self-response rate of 62.5. So we're not very far away from exceeding our 2010 response rate. And we're one of the few states actually in the South to be doing that in the Atlanta region. The total number of improved counties that we've seen, thanks to the CUNY Hard to Count map, is 35 out of 67. So 35 out of 67 counties are already performing higher than their 2010 rate, and they have been, but obviously at the more local levels, we can still get out the count even more and find those low-hanging fruit, as we like to talk about in the war room. The number of ACC counties, the hard-to-count counties that we were looking at, were around 14. In particular, in the Black Belt of Alabama, looking at Pickens County, Perry County, Macon, Dallas County, so forth and so on. And of these roughly 14 counties, 8 out of 14 are past their 2010 response rate. And this is really huge because when you think about the level of access to the internet and the level and the mail invitations that went out to get people counted, the improved census response in these counties was highly unlikely. And so to see how many people have been getting out the count and asking people to self-respond and getting involved with their churches and getting involved with their local community organizations to say, hey, you count, you matter, your voice matters, you count. Despite all odds, despite COVID-19, despite you not having the internet that your cousin may have in Birmingham, you responded. So I'm very encouraged by Alabama's performance in the 2020 census so far, but obviously we have a little bit more work to do. We're at 62.1. We need to be at 62.5 and above. I would love to see in the next 3 weeks Alabama just jump up. And I mean, because of all the different things that we've got going on, I think that's likely to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And in your opinion, I know you mentioned people volunteering with their church. What are some concrete ways our viewers in Alabama can get involved to help others get counted?
Right now, the first thing that I want everybody to do is get on Facebook, get on Twitter, and share and like as many census encouragement posts as possible. If you're watching this on Facebook right now, please visit the Alabama Hard to Count Collaborative page, where we have put together a plethora of materials that people can use to get out the count. And then on top of that, take 5 people in your most recently talked to list and say, hey, have you done your census? And encourage them to do so if they haven't. And if they have, ask them to reach out to 5 more people. Because ultimately everybody is close with, their circle of trust. And people in that 5 people of circle of trust know 5 more people. And so on and so forth, ultimately to a snowball effect of having a complete count in the state of Alabama. So that's what we think that is in the best interest in these last few days to get out the count.
Awesome. Great advice. Listen, we're having a great time thus far here on this Alabama panel, but we're going to take a quick break to hear from our leaders in Alabama.
What's up, Birmingham, Alabama? Mayor Randall Woodfin here to remind you to ask you one simple but important question. Have you completed your census yet? The U.S. Census is the bedrock of our democracy, as it determines who receives power and resources for a decade at a time. Communities who don't complete the census don't receive their fair share of power and are left underfunded and under-resourced for a generation. I don't want Birmingham left out. So please join me. Please join me in completing the census before September 30th. You can visit www.my2020census.gov to get started, or call 1-844-330-2020 to complete the census by phone. So Alabama, let's get counted.
Awesome. And joining us right now, we have Mayor Tim Ragland. Good to see you, Mayor of Talladega. How are you this evening?
Doing well. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Everything is well. We're going to kick the question off to you right after this break. The city of Talladega is home to Alabama's oldest private historically Black college, Talladega College. There's been a lot of talk recently about the critical importance of HBCUs and the role they play in educating our next generation of leaders. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role that Talladega College has played in the city's history?
Yeah, definitely. As you said, it's one of the oldest, or the oldest private HBCU in the state. They have educated hundreds of thousands of young people who have gone across the country and have done amazing things. A few of my family members being included. Talladega College was instrumental in me becoming mayor. The students there came out in droves to go support me at the polls. And that's something that we hope to see with the census. We're working with the student leadership and the administration there at the college to encourage the students to participate in their homes of record.
Awesome. And the 2020 census will impact more than 300 federal programs, including funding for education like Pell Grants. There's been a lot of confusion around how and where college students should be counted. Could you clear up some of that confusion and explain the impact of getting students counted accurately? This is a follow-up for you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So it's very important that we get an accurate count. As Mayor Whiffen said, so many millions or billions of dollars are allocated based on an accurate count in the census. In a small city like ours, money for police and fire departments, money for schools, the food programs, like we've seen here in the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to spend the city has spent a lot of money in providing meals to children who are not able to, purchase them because of they're out of school. But it's vitally important that we get an accurate count. So yeah. Am I talking too long? I'm sorry.
No, you're perfectly fine. We thank you so much for your input and your expertise and for serving the city of Talladega. In 2010, 3.8 million Black people were missed in the census. 2.2 million young children under 5 years old were missed. Black and brown children were twice as likely to be undercounted than white kids. And historically, Black men have experienced high net undercount rates in the census, with some age groups being undercounted by 10% in 2010. We know that undercounts in the census are the basis of a lot of the inequities that exist throughout our communities. Cedric, what type of work is Think Rubik's doing to break down silos and ensure communities that are traditionally disenfranchised, underrepresented, and underserved are accurately counted in 2020?
Well, some of the things that we have been doing over these past few months, phone banking has been one of the biggest things, calling into areas, low count, hard to count areas, contacting these communities, encouraging them to go and complete the census, finding out if they need assistance, they have the proper information on how to do it. Another thing that's been helpful, a few weeks back, and maybe more than a few weeks, about a month or two ago, Mayor Woodfin himself actually started going door to door with some city councilors and other members of the Birmingham community, and particularly into the housing communities, to go door to door and get people signed up for the census, personally using his phone and doing other methods to get people signed up for the census. We've also been reaching out to partners, trying to amplify their events and different things they've had going on. We've had a faith leaders convening for our Birmingham area or Birmingham-based faith-based organizations to provide them with information on how they can, incorporate the census into their sermons and different announcements they can send out, language for email blasts and text blasts to get people signed up for the census. We've also had some of our faith-based leaders serve as ambassadors for us on social media and encouraging their church members to also be participating. We've had a couple of city councilors that have agreed to do phone banking and contacting members of their district personally to make a personal appeal to get that. We've been working with the Birmingham City Schools to make sure they are sending out communication to the students because this affects them the most when you're talking about dollars for education. So, and even when you look at the city of Birmingham and what they're going through with the budget shortfalls and budget cuts and all that, but how much more could the city of Birmingham do if everyone was counted or if they had a higher amount counted? So that's what we've really been trying to do and really just push an all hands on deck mentality and approach. So so starting September 1st, we kicked off a 30-day census, 30 days of census campaign. And it's just us with our social media on Count Me In BHM or Count Me In Birmingham on Facebook and Instagram, posting different facts and a countdown each day about the census and why it's important for people to get involved in the census. So we've had a number of ambassadors and people speaking on our behalf to be able to push the census. The city of Birmingham has done commercials. They've done billboards. So it's been a lot going on. We're sending out a mailer in the next week or so to follow up with the, because oftentimes people receive the census information, but that came in a white envelope with black and white information, easy to disregard and put to the side. But something colorful and something that pops out can better get their attention with the website they can go to, with also the phone number they can use as well. So we have been utilizing any and every tool we can and working with as many people as we can to be able to get folks counted for the census. Me and Jay have worked. This is not the first panel we've been a part of, and we've also been a part of a lot of calls and different meetings to strategize on how to get people counted, particularly in the city of Birmingham.
Awesome, amazing work. How would these efforts transform our communities across Alabama into a future that truly works for everyone? Do you mind sharing?
Yeah. One of the biggest things, particularly with the African-American community, is not being counted, our voices not being heard. This is the simplest way for, black people in Birmingham and throughout the state of Alabama, minority population in general, Latinos, Indians, it doesn't matter, Native Americans. It's the easiest way for you to be counted, and you can do it from the convenience of your home. I know we're pushing the importance of voting next, coming up with November 3rd, but voting requires you to leave your house, have a plan, have a strategy, send out an absentee ballot, do a number of things. But the census is 10 questions and takes, I've heard some people complete the census in little as 4 minutes. So the average time to complete is 6 minutes. So when you speak on education and the educational resources with schools, with cities not having, schools can provide Chromebooks to students to be able to do their education, but there's no Wi-Fi connection for them to be able to have. So when you look at counting, making sure everyone is counted is really going back to what everyone has said tonight, making sure the city has enough resources for everyone and not create a delay. One of the biggest things that's been happening is, they send resources, whether it be the federal government, the state government, local government, does food drives and food banks. And then you have this overflow and influx of people, and it's overwhelming leaders because they literally didn't account for this amount of people, because on their rolls, it doesn't show that many people. So when you're talking about people who are using federal programs, federal services, city service, state services, it is critically, particularly when it comes to our kids, making sure our kids are counted. So when you talk about funding for possible college scholarships, later down the line, making sure we have an accurate account of all our kids to know how many scholarships we're looking at giving out, or how many people will be in need of financial aid for college, or will need a workforce development. So it's I can't say it enough, and I think we'll say this enough time. The more people we have counted, the better. and particularly in these hard to count communities or hard to count areas of populations, it's even more important that they're counting, because this is a way for them to be heard, for us to be heard by getting this, by doing the census. So it's one of the easiest things you can do to be involved and show your form of civic engagement or activism. So completing the census is a form of activism. I'm just going to say that right now. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution that every citizen has to be counted. So this is you doing your civic duty and responsibility and your form of activism for your community by being counted.
Wow, this is great.
Jordan, I'd love to
Sure.
piggyback on that if you don't mind. Cedric mentioned something about kids and the importance of them being counted. As a social worker, I deal frequently with helping families get their kids in Head Start. And Head Start, for those that don't know, Head Start is a governmentally administered program that provides developmentally based learning opportunities for kids, in particular low-income kids. And more often than not, I am having to disappoint a parent by letting them know that their child is being put on a wait list. And what people don't know is Head Start, in research shows this, Head Start ultimately will provide more opportunities for the child that experiences that either early Head Start or Head Start in the long run. And so when you're not able to take advantage of that opportunity, not because you didn't try, but because there's not a spot available to you, that's very discouraging. And what we can see for the future, if we have an accurate census, improved resources will then be able to be distributed to a Head Start program. Improved funds will be able to go to a Head Start program, and then we would have less children going without that early education that could be so impactful for not just the 10 years, but their entire life.
Thank you so much for that. Great information. We have some more questions coming up, but first, let's have another message from one of our leaders.
Hi, Montgomery, Alabama. I'm Candy Capel, Census Manager for Montgomery Counts. The census is important to the city of Montgomery because we can't afford to be sitting at the back of the bus during this process. As Mayor Stephen Reed, one of America's youngest Black mayors, often reminds us, our Black and Hispanic populations stand to lose over $200 million and $36 million if these populations are undercounted. That's why Montgomery Counts and the Montgomery County Commission have partnered to ensure a fair and accurate count. We acquired free store space in Eastdale Mall and set up Census Central, an on-site count center. We've taken census counts through miles of car windows while our citizens are waiting for food distribution. We included census information in school lunch packets for our local public school children and their families. And our public service announcements are running during virtual worship services hosted by our community churches. Montgomery is on the march again, but this time it's for the 2020 census. In Alabama, we know that I count, you count, we all count.
Great. For generations, faith institutions have been the bedrock of civic engagement and activism. Most, if not all, large movements have involved faith in some way or another, and the census is no different. We have seen places of worship mobilize their congregants in 2020 in innovative ways. Pastor Jackson, why have you made the census an important part of civic outreach?
Thank you. I think everyone has already spoken. We're at risk to lose so much money. What did he say? Over $4,000 per person of African Americans are at risk to lose. Personally, our church have been able to be a benefactor of a CDC subgrant based on the census tract of 2010. So that's personal to us that we're able to get this money, this federal money allocated again, that we can teach healthy living. I'm bivocational. I'm a registered nurse over 35 years. I've been a part of 2 hospital closings. I know the hurt in our rural hospitals where they're not there anymore, and specifically our nursing homes, and we're getting to be an older population. So just like the movement that began at Brown's Chapel AME Church in Selma, Alabama, joined by Lutherans, Buddhists, and all faith communities came together to mobilize the civil rights movement, the voting rights movement. Here we are again. We are including 2020 census information in our worship bulletin when we go to evangelize to communities, particularly the housing projects. Like Candy Capel has said, they have been there. They have been there when we're handing out food during the pandemic. We're putting flyers in our senior boxes, because if we do not count in the census, particularly our seniors and our children, we will not receive the same amount of USDA feeding programs that we're getting now. So our congregations, because faith leaders have been considered trusted voices in the communities, it does make a difference that faith leaders are able to speak up. Again, our mayor of Montgomery, just like your Birmingham mayor, calls together faith leaders. Over 60 faith leaders will join him weekly, and he himself has equipped us with current information and resources to reach our congregations and beyond. We're the center of the community. There are more churches down one street than we have grocery stores in our community. So that's a place to start. And we're grateful to be a part of that.
And surely this has been a trying time for faith leaders across the South. Many have seen their fellow leaders suffer from COVID-19, seen their congregants pass away, but we know that we will get through this. Pastor Jackson, what is your message of hope and perseverance when there is so much despair around us?
Yes, you touched. We've had several faith leaders, and one just close to myself, another women in ministry in the Opelika area just died of COVID-19, and her grandson is still in the hospital. But with COVID-19, there has been a drawing, and we've been able to reach people that normally do not walk into a building, that the Church Universal has been able to touch people by technology. We're Zooming out, giving hope. We're YouTubing, Instagram, text message, phone calls, and we're able to tap in to households that have not tapped in to the churches before. So COVID-19 truly has brought us closer to our Creator, our God, and that is where our hope lies. And our faith leaders continue to be that balm in Gilead for the members that are hurting, that are in pain, that are scared. And faith over fear is what we preach. Hope and prayer and
absolutely
community.
Absolutely. Great words to live by.
Where we are.
I want to turn it over to Judge McPherson. For years, you graciously served your community as a judge. You saw the negative impacts of being undercounted on a daily basis. Our ability to recover from COVID-19 across Alabama depends on a fair and accurate count in the 2020 census. In part, this is why we coined the name Census in the South, Road to Recovery. As you see it, what is our way forward beyond this global pandemic? How do we begin to rebuild our communities, knowing that our future is indeed in our hands?
Jordan, I think we have to focus on that part of the theme for tonight that says the future is in our hands. We must be the arbiters of the success. And in that connection, I've thought about a paradigm, and the paradigm is education, information, and implementation. Here's what I mean by that. Tiger Woods started playing golf when he was 3. Wynton Marsalis and his brothers Delfeo and Branford started playing musical instruments when they were children. Venus and Serena Williams began playing tennis before they were teenagers. They are experts in their field now. All of them are. They are knowledgeable about what they do now because they secured a firm understanding of it years and years ago. So I'm starting with education in that 3-part paradigm of education, information, and implementation. It is time for us to begin to think seriously about adjusting the curricula in our schools so that our children have a solid civic education. There was a time, for example, when I was in school, when we took home economics, boys took shop. Those were electives. Well, it is now time for our children to learn civics. And I don't mean learning that we have an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch. You can learn that in your government class. I'm talking about curricular in our schools that teach children that as citizens, they have not only a role to play, but a responsibility to fulfill. Oftentimes, one of the reasons why, and there are many, but one of the reasons why it's so difficult to get people to return the census forms is that they really know nothing about the census. Right. They've never heard of a census. That's right. We aren't talking about something that happens every quarter or happens annually. It is something that happens every 10 years. So if it happens when you're 5 years old and you know absolutely nothing, it won't happen again until you're 15. And in the meantime, nobody's really talking about census except the people who do the census. So it is time for us to lobby our school boards to make changes in our school curricula that teach children about civic engagement. The census is an extremely important part of that. Voting is an equally, if not a more important part of that. By the time a child gets to the 6th grade, he ought to have filled out a ballot. He ought to understand running for office. He ought to understand what it takes to run for office. He ought to understand all of the different levels of office holding, from the national elections down to the local elections. He ought to understand the difference between what a mayor does and what a city council does. There is nothing in our schools now that educates our children to be citizens. I'm not denigrating any of the academic subject areas. They are all important, but there is room for children to be taught to engage civically. The other thing I wanted to mention was that as a result of that kind of education, or even in spite of not having it, we need to start talking to decision makers. I'm not on social media, but my friends who are tell me that for the most part, people who are on social media talk to whom? They talk to each other. They talk to each other. We've got to start talking to the decision makers. When senators and Congress members and state legislators look at their feed, they need to hear from us. They need to know what we think is wrong. They need to know what we think is right. They need to hear from us. And they don't need to get a form letter that an organization sends out to 1,000 people to sign and send in the same letter. Everyone understands what's going on. They need to get a frank, personalized discussion of an issue from thousands of constituents. It's wonderful to march in the street and to protest and to make our wishes known and to make our dissatisfaction known loudly and clearly. But it is equally important, as many ways as we have now to communicate with people: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email, text, as many ways as we have to communicate with decision makers, we've got to start using those means to tell Senator X and Congresswoman Y what we feel, how we feel, because I promise you, I talk to them. They don't hear from us in droves. They really don't. They don't hear from us in droves about issues. And those issues have to be issues that specifically involve the African American community, and they have to be issues that don't specifically involve the African American community, because in fact, all of them involve us. If we think about it, people don't think sometimes about the fact that Alabama's denial or Alabama's rejection of Medicaid falls most heavily on African American communities. Yes, it falls on rural communities. Yes, there have been rural hospitals that have been closed. But in the meantime, African Americans are suffering because they don't have the access to Medicaid that they should have. And it's not just a question of having additional medical care. It's a question of the state having rejected millions of dollars in federal aid so that it can happen. It not only affects the health care available, and I'm sorry, Dr. Mcshane, I know this is your area, but it doesn't only affect the dollars that are coming into Alabama, it affects the doctors who are practicing in Alabama, who can practice here, who's willing to stay. And when a hospital closes, doctors are out of work in that area and they are not able to provide care. So that's just one example. So that is why I say that we have got to own the changes we make. And by owning the changes we make, I mean that we have got to continue to advocate by communicating with decision makers instead of always communicating with each other.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for your eloquent response. Let's hear from one more leader in our state.
Good afternoon. I'm Bernard Simonson, president of the Alabama State Conference of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And I want to talk to you about the 2020 census. It's so important that we complete the 2020 census. 3 or 4 easy steps. One is to complete it when you receive the census in mail. Have one person to complete it and send it back. The other way is to call the census hotline at 1-844-330-2020, and they will take the information over the phone. Another way is to complete the census by going to www.my2020census.gov. And of course, the final way is when the census taker come to your residence, be cooperative with them and provide the information that they need in order to make you part of the 2020 census and have you counted. So complete the 2020 census, and we look forward to you being a part of this important event. Thank you very much.
Tonight's dialogue has certainly been informative and has given us some historical background on the role of being counted and not being counted in the census. I'd like to now turn to each of our special guests for some closing remarks, starting with you, Pastor Jackson.
Thank you. Time is short. We must pray, but after we kneel or stand to pray, we've got to walk. We've got to walk it out, talk it out, and tell everyone that the census is confidential, it's protected data. That's another fear that we have in our community because we've encountered injustices in our systemic criminal justice system that they're afraid to give their information. We have undocumented Black and brown people, and we need to get the message out. It is safe and it is protected by Title 13. Time is short. Count. You do count. Thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you so much for being here. Mayor Ragland, how about you? Your closing remarks.
Thank you, Jordan. With so much going on in our country, we see the pandemic is going on, and then we're facing again and again the pandemic of racism and xenophobia and homophobia and all these different mental viruses that are going on. We need to make sure we take the opportunity to not be left out. As many have said, this is a very easy way to have our voice heard. This, along with the vote, ensures that we have our voice heard. We have a seat at the table, because if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. So I encourage you all to take the time to complete your census and encourage your friends and family to do the same.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Mcshane, your closing remarks.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you guys this evening. Kind of echoing what Mayor Ragland said. There's a lot going on. There's a lot happening right now in our state, in our country, and in our world. We have racial turmoil, racial unrest. An election is coming up, a crucially important election. We're working through a global pandemic, the likes of which we've never seen before in our lives and will hopefully never see again. Businesses are closed. The economy is struggling. Schools are closed. Parents are dealing with homeschooling and Zoom classes. I mean, truly, there are so many different things happening all at once. It can be quite overwhelming. But this isn't the time to miss out on those things that are most important. This isn't the time to let opportunities slip between our fingers and out of our grasp. The census is just too important to let it fall by the wayside. It's too impactful, and it's going to mean too many things for too many individuals, families, and communities to let it slip despite all the other challenges that we're dealing with. So I implore and encourage everyone to understand the importance and gravity of it, to take the few minutes that it requires. If there is a good thing, it only takes a few minutes to get it done. Invest that amount of time in yourself and your family and your community's future. And once you get it done, you can check that box and go back to the other million things that are happening all at once, because I know it's a lot. So keep that in mind, keep the future in mind, and get the census filled out.
Thank you.
Thanks
Mr.
again.
Norman, how about you? Final thoughts?
Thank you, Jordan, for moderating this forum and this panel discussion tonight. And thank you to the organizations for putting this on and giving us the opportunity to show why the census is important. It's important. If it wasn't important, we wouldn't be doing this. It wouldn't be so much work going into making sure everyone knows about it. So there is so much on the line for the city of Birmingham being accurately counted, for the state of Alabama being accurately counted, for underrepresented populations to be accurately counted, for Black folks to be accurately counted. There's a lot on the line, and there can't be any excuses why we can't get this done. There is a mail form. There are people that are going to be coming door to door. There is the internet. There is a phone number. So there are multiple ways to get this done. So there should be no excuse why this shouldn't get done. So I know there's a lot of fear when it comes to Black communities and the government asking for information, but we cannot let the mistreatment of our people in the past affect our future. We cannot let them take this away from us. We cannot give it away either. We have to be vigilant in making sure we do everything we can to provide the resources not only for ourselves now, but for our future. 10 years is a very long time, and a lot can happen in 10 years. And we don't want negative things to happen simply because we weren't counted and we didn't have the funding to be able to make it happen. So this is one of the easiest things you can do to honor your civic engagement as a citizen, as a resident of this country, of this state, and of this city. So no matter where you are in the state of Alabama, make sure you're counted. And beyond making sure you're counted, make sure your family members, make sure your friends incorporate the census into your daily conversation. We don't have that much time. Originally, it was thought that we would have to the end of October, but now it got cut down to the end of September. That was done purposely for a reason, because who will lose the most by this decision is going to be our communities. It's going to be us. It's going to be people that look like you and everyone else on this panel. So it's even more critical now more than ever to not be silent, not to stand on the sidelines, but get in the game and get counted. And after you get counted, come up with your plan on how you're going to vote for November 3rd. Don't let it take away. Don't give it away. We all have a responsibility to make this state, make the city a better place.
Thank you so much for those remarks. Judge McPherson, please.
Thank you, Jordan. And I'd like to express my appreciation to Fair Count and to E Pluribus Unum for sponsoring and presenting this panel. It's extremely important. And I hope that the people watching, especially those who are not connected with census gathering, are inspired to do exactly what Cedric Norman has suggested. Let me see if I can offer 3 additional perspectives, one of which Cedric Norman touched upon, that make census compliance, and that's what I call it, make census compliance imperative. Here's the first one. The pandemic has deprived our cities and our states of enormous amounts of money, especially in a city like Montgomery, which secures so much of its revenue from sales taxes and from lodging taxes and hotels that have not been used because people have not been traveling due to the pandemic. So the pandemic itself has significantly compromised the revenue gathering that a city has. And it is necessary not only for us to redeem that after the pandemic is over, but to comply with the census in such a way that we get as much funding as we can. That's number one. Number two, President Trump has tried two major ways to compromise the census. One, he tried to make asking whether you were a citizen a mandate, and that didn't work. That was aimed at undocumented people. Then he shortened the time by 30 days, that is from the end of October to September 30th, to make sure that we had as little time as possible, because he and those around him are very much aware of the fact that in our communities, there is less of a tendency to comply with census, the numbers gathering. But number three, we now find ourselves in a position, fortunately, where those who will make decisions about how the money is spent, who have the discretion to decide how the money will be distributed when it does come to cities, are African Americans. They are African Americans in Birmingham and Montgomery and Tuskegee and Talladega, Atlanta, Jackson, Mississippi, Memphis, New Orleans. So that level of latitude and discretion highlights the need to fill out the census form so we can get the funds, because those in whose hands have been entrusted the discretion to decide can more likely be trusted upon to act in our interest. So for those three reasons, we just need to comply. And I agree with Cedric Norman when he says that it should become a part not only of your daily conversation, but your daily life. So I join every voice on this panel in encouraging people, in treating people, please fill out the census form, and encourage everyone you know to do so as well.
And I believe we have a video from Jay Williams with his final thoughts.
Hi everybody, Libby Liberty here. In 2020, we take a census. That means that the government counts every person in every community and every state all over the whole United States. This was decided by our U.S. Constitution in 1790, and we do it every 10 years. The results of the 2020 census determine how hundreds of billions of dollars in federal funding flow into communities every year for the next decade. That funding shapes many different aspects of every community, no matter the size and no matter the location. This is important because things like congressional seats, government funds for schools, and road work on public highways are all determined based on the census we take this year. Encourage your parent to get you counted, and you can go online for more information. You can also find online lots of fun activities for you to learn what a census is and how you can get involved. So be a good super citizen, and I'll see you later. Bye!
On behalf of Fair Count and E Pluribus Unum, I would like to thank our guests for joining us tonight for our Alabama virtual stop along the Census in the South Road to Recovery virtual bus tour. A couple of reminders. You can complete your census questionnaire tonight by going to my2020census.gov, by calling 1-844-330-2020, or by sending your paper questionnaire by mail. You can also visit censusinthesouth.org for updates on this virtual bus tour. Take care and see you soon.